To create these KPI cards with sales and order metrics, along with the percentage of progress towards each goal, we'll begin by designing the KPI card boxes. I wanted to add a shadow and a slight gradients to these boxes. So instead of using an annotation to create a box, I'm going to bring in an image onto my dashboard. And I'll choose a file I created in Canva. And I have this linked in the description, but this image was super easy to create if you want to choose a different color or size. So for the first card, I'm going to choose a blue gradient box. And once I get this position where I want it to be, I'm going to do the same process by going to the Dashboard tab, dragging an image in, and choosing a file. And after I get these KPI boxes in, I'm going to drag a text box in so we can label the elements in our dashboard. So this first one I'll call Sales, and I'll change the font to be white, Tableau medium, size 15, and bold. And Sales is going to be for our KPI card, so I'll drag it to the first box. Then I'll copy and paste our Sales text box, edit the text, and call it Orders. The first element I'll create for the KPI cards is an orbit chart, representing the progress made towards the sales goal. So I'll create a new worksheet called Orbit-Sales. And to create an orbit chart, we need to first unionize our data. So I'll go to the Data Source tab, and I'll drag our order table under our original order table to union them together. This stacks the two tables on top of each other and duplicates the amount of rows we have. And you can see here on the right, it generated a field called Table Name. This will either contain orders or orders 1, depending on if it was the original table or the unionized table. So on the Orbit Sales worksheet, I'll pull Table Name in. That way we can see the values. Then I'll create a calculated field and call it Orbit-Points. In here I'll type if the table name contains 1, then 1, else 360. And using 360 will allow us to plot a circle. And I'll right-click on our Orbit Points field, go to Create, and choose Bins. I'll set the size of the bins to 1, but keep all the other settings the same. Then I'll create another calculated field for the x-axis. This will be the sign of the radians of the index. And I'll create another calculated field for our y-axis. This will be the cosine of the radians of the index. And because this orbit chart is representing the progress, I need to create a parameter to assign a goal. So I'll call this sales goal and change the current value to 3.5 million. Then I'll right-click and show the parameter on the worksheet. To calculate the progress that's been made towards this goal, I'll create another calculated field called Orbit%Complete. In here I'll type the window sum of the sales, which is our metric. Divide that by 2 since we union the data together, and then divide that by the sales goal parameter. So this will return the percent that's been made towards the sales goal. And the last calculated field we'll need for this is to determine the colors. So I'll call this Orbit Colors, and I'll say if the index divided by the window max of the index is less than our Orbit%Complete field, then 1, else 0. To build the structure of the orbit chart, I'll start by removing our table name field. And because I named these all with orbit, I'm going to search orbit within our fields. I'll move X into the columns and Y into the rows. Then I'll move the points bin into the marks. I'll right-click on our Orbit X field, go to Compute Using, and choose the points bin. And I'll do the same thing for Y. And now you can see we have the circle shape, but these are currently open circles. So under the marks, I'm going to change it from shape to a circle. To apply the coloring, I'm going to move the Orbit Colors field into the marks, right-click, go to Compute Using, and choose the Points bin. Then I'll right-click again and make it discrete. And now I can change this to a color. Using the legend, I'll edit the colors, and a new trick I found is if you double-click on the color, you can change it directly within Tableau without having to use your preferences. So I'll do the same thing for the 1. And since 1 represents the portion of the sales goal that's already completed, I'll set its color to white. To increase the size of our orbit chart, I'll use the size slider in the marks. And I also want to include the actual percent completed. So in the rows, I'll type 0. Then under the second mark I've created, I'm going to change it from a circle to text. And I'll remove what we currently have in there. Instead, I'll drag our orbit percent complete field into the second mark. Then right-click, go to Compute Using, and choose Cell. And change it from a detail to a text. I'll right-click, go to Format, and under Numbers, I'll change this to a percentage with no decimals. Then I'll right-click on one of our rows and make this a dual axis. That way we can get the percent complete inside our orbit chart. Under text in the second mark, I'm going to edit the text and make the font white, Tableau medium, size 12, and bold. For formatting, I'll remove all of the headers. Then I'll format the worksheet. And for shading, I'm going to remove the shading of the worksheet. Under borders, I'll remove the row divider and the column divider. And under lines, I'll remove the grid lines and the zero lines. On a dashboard, I'll add our Orbit Sales worksheet. I'll hide the title and get rid of the parameter and legend. Then I'll resize our orbit chart so it fits in our KPI box. And now we have an orbit chart that shows the percentage of progress that's been made towards the sales goal that we set. For orders, I'm going to set up a similar orbit chart. So I'm going to take our Orbit Sales worksheet and duplicate it. And I'll call this one Orbit Orders. And since orders is going to have a different goal than our sales, I'm going to create a parameter for our order quantity goal. And for this one, I'll set the current value to 90,000. And we can use a lot of fields from our previous orbit chart, but we do need to duplicate our orbit complete field. I'll edit that field and rename it so it's about the order quantity. Then I'll replace sales with our quantity field. And instead of the sales goal, I'll put in the order quantity goal parameter. And the percent complete field is being used to determine the colors, so I also need to duplicate our orbit color field. And I'll edit this one so it's about the order quantity. So instead of our orbit percent complete, I'm going to put in our order quantity field for the percent complete. Then under the first mark, I'll replace our orbit colors field with our new field for quantity. I'll right-click, go to Compute Using, and choose the points bin. I'll right-click again and make it discrete. Under the second mark, instead of our percent complete for sales, I'll drag in our percent complete for orders. Then I'll right-click, go to Compute Using, and choose Cell. And for coloring, I'll double-click on a color in our legend. And since 0 will represent the part that we haven't completed yet, I'm going to make this an orange color. That way it matches our KPI card color. And for 1, the percent we have completed, I'll make this white. And on the dashboard, I'll add the Orbit Orders worksheet. I'll hide the title again and remove the parameter and legend. Then I'll resize it and position it similar to our sales orbit chart. So now we have two orbit charts that represent the sales and the order progress. I think it'd also be useful to see the actual amounts for sales and orders, so I'm going to add that to the KPI card. And to make it more efficient, I'm going to do this on one worksheet. So I'll call this KPI values. Then I'll search for measures so I can pull the measure names into the columns and the measure values into the marks. I'll make the measure values a text in the marks. Then I'll remove all the measure values that's not sales and quantity. And since sales is our first KPI card, I'm going to move it before quantity. But it's kind of hard to read a number that big, so I'm going to right-click Format on the sales. And I'll change this to a custom currency in the millions. And we already have titles for the KPI card, so I'm going to right-click on the title and uncheck Show Header. For formatting, I'm going to change the font to a white color. Also make this size 12 font and Tableau semi-bold. Under alignment, I'm going to choose to align it on the left side. For shading, I'm going to remove the shading for the worksheet. And for borders, I'll remove the row divider. Then on the dashboard, I'll add our KPI values worksheet. I'll hide the title, and I'll resize it so that the KPI values appear right below their titles, and I'll offset it a little bit to the right. And you may have noticed that these numbers are a little bit high for what the sales and orders should actually be. And that's because we union the table with itself, which duplicated the data. So to fix this, I'll go back to our KPI values worksheet, and I'll bring table name into the filters and just choose one. And now we have two KPI cards displaying sales and order metrics, each paired with an orbit chart that shows the percentage of progress made toward their respective goals.